Alright, listeners, welcome to episode 3 of the BLC. This episode's going to focus on 4 of my own stories. Stories about encountering the strange, the unknown, the weird and the wild, out in the wilderness, and while I can say I have not seen a Bigfoot up close and personal, I can't say that I've seen a Bigfoot with my physical eyes, I can say that these experiences, these stories I'm about to tell you, have helped convince me of the legitimacy of this phenomenon. I hope you enjoy the stories. So my question for all the Bigfoot believers and skeptics alike is this: how do you reconcile the fact that literally every culture in the world today has legends and connections to the creature we often refer to as Bigfoot, dating back to the dawn of time? Is this just coincidence, or is it something more? Why do all the stories contain the same recurring descriptions and themes? Whether they call them Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Yeren, Skunk Ape, Yowie, or some other name, the reports are all the same. From America to China, the Himalayas to Australia, literally every continent has the same phenomenon. Why do we see such similarities? How could this story permeate throughout the entire globe? Is there definitive proof of the existence of Bigfoot? That's what I'm on a mission to figure out. Join me as we uncover the stories, the evidences, and the unbelievable yet true events that have occurred all throughout the world. My goal is to turn skeptics into believers, and believers into knowers. I'm Riley Woolner, and welcome to the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast. All right, welcome to the show, listeners. So, I want to start off with my first story, which takes place in August of 2019. This was the first time that I can honestly say that I was aware of something going on in the forest that I couldn't really explain. And, of course, many of the skeptics will say, well, Riley, you knew what Bigfoot was at this point, and you'd done so much research and learned all about the supposed signs. So whatever, it was the power of suggestion. So anything that was in the forest, whatever you were going to see, of course, you're going to assume is Sasquatch. And while they do have a point, the power of suggestion is strong. I'd like to think that, one, I'm a rational person. I am experienced outdoors. And I believe that knowing what the signs are actually is more evidence that I would recognize what was going on more than someone who didn't know what to look for and would possibly assume it was something else. So, this took place in the state of Idaho, and I was going to college at the time. My wife had gone back home to Oregon for one of her friend's weddings. So I was home by myself for the weekend and thought that I'd go for a hike. And I was excited because I thought, you know what, this is my opportunity to, one, enjoy the outdoors, but two, get the chance to kind of on my own look for any of these signs for these creatures, because I'd been listening to Sasquatch Chronicles, I'd been looking on YouTube and looking online for about a year, and I had learned a whole lot about what to look for and what to listen for and all of this. And at the same time, this subject matter creeped me out a lot, because I thought to myself, well, if these things are real, then they probably are dangerous, and I don't want to run into one of these things. So at the same time as feeling like this was an opportunity to go looking for these creatures, I also kind of went back and forth between putting it in the back of my mind and pretending like it wasn't real, and having it at the forefront of my mind, feeling like I was going to go, searching for this thing. And I was playing this game of ping pong in my head when it came to this subject, the whole drive out there. And I went to the Caribou-Targhee National Forest, which is in eastern Idaho, close to the Wyoming border. And when I got out of the truck to go up this trail, I decided to put my earbuds in because I felt like at this point I didn't want to freak myself out, and so I just wanted to enjoy the exercise and being outdoors. So I put my earbuds in, and as I started walking up this trail, I realized I only saw one other couple that had come up from where the trail was leading off to, and they came down and went to the one, I'm guessing the only other truck that I saw in the gravel area where everyone would park. And so I knew that I was the only one out there after they had kind of gone down the hill. And as I was listening to my music, I started looking around me, and to my right, I saw in the forest, I saw that there were some of these tree formations that, according to Native American folklore, are attributed to the Bigfoot creatures. And for those who aren't familiar with what they look like, you can get online and Google Sasquatch tree formations, and essentially, you'll find kind of like two classes of them. One of them is that you'll find these big, long tree trunks that are crisscrossing each other in all kinds of ways that are just not natural. You can watch on YouTube Les Stroud, Survivor Man. If you're not familiar with who he is, he had a show in the early 2000s. And still currently does, but he was a big deal in the early 2000s on, I want to say, National Geographic or Discovery Channel, where he teaches you how to survive in the wilderness. And he has a channel or a series of videos on YouTube now devoted to the whole Sasquatch phenomenon. And he has a specific video that shows he shows you how you can distinguish between a bunch of branches and trunks of trees that have fallen over naturally due to snow, and that versus a tree formation made by something that didn't happen or didn't occur naturally. Someone specifically put it there, and often these are found out in the middle of nowhere, and that's exactly what I recognize. So like I said, there are these two classes. There's the one that are the big longer trunks that are all kind of stacked in a funny way, so that way they're hard to get out, often with the roots pointing up into the air while the top of the tree is sort of shoved into the ground, which is definitely not a natural way for a tree to be found. And the second class is kind of like a little teepee formation around the trunk of a bigger tree. So I saw some of these bigger ones that were leaning on each other to my right. And I'm listening to my earbuds, and I think to myself, you know what? Maybe just to be safe, I should take my earbuds out, because that's the first time I was able to recognize something that I said to myself, that could be related to the whole Sasquatch thing. So as I kept on hiking, I turned to my right, and instead of going to the left, which was the main trail where that was big enough for ATVs to go through, I turned to the right onto a smaller trail that would only be small enough for essentially one person to walk along, and if you had a group, you'd have to go single file down. I walk along, and eventually I get out to a clearing where you can look over and see this beautiful view of the forest. And it's August, so it's nice weather out. It's Idaho, so it's in the probably 70s or 80s. But it is an overcast day, so it was gray clouds and had kind of just a very eerie kind of feeling. And as I was looking out over this view, where I could see all of these trees below me, and I had the wildflowers behind me, and to the back of me and to the left there was some boulders, and behind that was the rest of the forest. And it started it goes up into like a hill where that forest is. So if someone were to be standing up in that forest, they'd be looking down at where I was, overlooking the rest of the forest on that lookout point. So as I'm standing there and looking out, I kind of noticed that the forest got eerily quiet. And I understand that sometimes when you're in a place out in the wilderness, especially after having spent a lot of time in the suburbs or the city, or even the countryside, when you get out to some of these more remote areas in national forests and stuff like that, I get that it can get quiet, but this was really, really quiet. Like there wasn't even a bird, and or any bugs or anything. And so when it kind of got like this, I started once again freaking myself out because I said, don't make everything out to be Sasquatch. Don't make everything out to be Sasquatch. This could just be a normal, natural thing. And then I remember hearing a snap in that group of trees in the forest up the hill behind me. And I turned around and I didn't see any obvious, Bigfoot or person or anything like that. So I turned around and took some pictures of the view, and then I heard it again, snap. And this time it wasn't just a snap of twigs. It sounded like someone was taking a branch the size of the middle part of a baseball bat and smacking it against a tree and snapping it, or breaking it over their thigh like you would for a campfire. And I wondered if possibly there was a cow in that direction, because in Idaho, it's very common in a lot of these parts of the national forests for ranchers to be allowed to let their cattle sort of free range, and then at the end of the summer or whenever it is, they bring them all back. But they'll kind of just wander the trails, and it's not uncommon to go hiking and see a cow wandering along, or a few for that matter. So I thought, well, maybe it's just a cow, and if it is a cow, I'll probably spook it by tossing a rock. So I went over to the boulders, which were just below this forested hill, and I grabbed up a rock and tossed it up there, and yelled out and said, "Hey, cow," or something like that, and there was no movement. There's nothing. So I thought that was kind of odd, because normally if you make loud noise or toss something in a cow's direction, it will run off. Not always, but often that will happen, and at least in my experience. So as I'm staring off into the forest, I realize once again that it is just so quiet. And then as I kind of peer deeper into the trees, I realize there's something in there. It was just beyond my line of sight, and it was just on the other side of a group of trees, but I could see it was something dark and very big, and I had this feeling that whoever they or whoever it was looking at me. And that's all I can say. It was a feeling, because I couldn't see whoever this was. And that was the most unnerving part of it all, was that I felt like there was someone there. And once again, it didn't feel like something. It didn't feel like there was a cow there that just wasn't, acknowledging me or something like that. I'd been around plenty of cows that I couldn't necessarily see, that I could hear in the forest and didn't feel creeped out. This felt to me like someone was there watching me, knowing that I couldn't see them, and they were creeping on me like that. And that was a very disturbing feeling, and so I ducked behind the boulder that was right there and kind of, bent down on my knees to try and clear my head and not freak myself out. And then I hear once again that loud snapping sound of the trees. Something was moving in there. It was that whatever it was moving. Just like I said, just in that same range where I couldn't see, but it was moving to the right a little bit. And I came out from behind the boulder and just said, "Hey, who's there?" And there was no response, and it was still quiet, still creepy. And that was when it hit me that I realized, okay, if this is what I'm assuming it to be, I don't have anything to protect me if it decides to come out. And I couldn't fathom seeing one of these things when I was alone by myself like this, and felt so defenseless. I didn't have a gun. I didn't even have any bear spray, not even a pocket knife. I came out completely weaponless and defenseless, expecting just an innocent summer's hike. So as this thing started moving away, I thought that I was in the clear, and then it started walking back towards where towards where it originally was to the left. And as it started walking that way, that's when I realized, okay, I gotta get out of here. I don't know who or what this is, but it's creeping me out. And I'm not gonna stand around to try and find out, because if it is a Bigfoot and it's has, ill intent, I am hosed. So I booked it down that trail. And once again, this could have been my imagination, but I really don't think it was. I could kind of hear and feel like I was being escorted out in a way. To my right as I'm walking down, there was more of it was a slope that went down into the forest, and it felt to me like I kept on hearing noises down there, and it freaked me out. And there was no one else around. I got to my truck, which was the only one in the parking area where in the gravel, turned it on and drove on out of there. And it was exciting, but at the same time, quite creepy. So I didn't really go hiking by myself as much after that for a little bit. I still do go hiking on my own, but now I usually will bring at least bear spray. So fast forward to, because that took place in August of 2019. So fast forward a year later to the end of August or beginning of September of 2020. At this point, my wife Nikki and I had moved to Midvale, Utah, just for a few months while I was doing my student teaching, and I was studying to become a high school Spanish teacher. And I was going to be teaching at the one of the local high schools there, doing my student teaching. And before the school year started, we wanted to go and have a last sort of hoorah camp out. And one of my best friends, Wesley, came with us. And we decided to go up a canyon called Little Cottonwood Canyon. And we found a spot nestled into some aspen trees. And if anyone has ever been up the canyons in Utah, they are just absolutely gorgeous. And you get some of the most pretty colors during the fall time, as at the end of summer and beginning of fall, especially these aspens. In the wind, I believe they're called quaking aspens, because it seems like they kind of tremble in the wind. And it makes almost this jingling sound, almost like coins jingling, the way that the leaves will blow. And they're usually like this bright yellow or orange, and just a super pretty part of the country. And we found this trail that went off the highway, not even that far. Honestly, that we could hear the highway probably just 100 yards below us. And we set up our camping area. And as it's getting darker, we start our fire. And before it gets totally dark, one of the park rangers, she comes along and tells us that due to it being the dry season, we can't actually have a fire. So that kind of put a damper on our plans, and we put out the fire almost completely while she was there. And then when she left, we had just a few coals that made like the smallest of fires in our little pit that we had made. Very safe. And it was just enough light to kind of barely see each other, and as the night got chillier, to keep us, ever so slightly warmer as we sat around it. So we sat around talking and chatting and enjoying each other's company till probably around 11 o'clock, when Nikki said she wanted to go to bed, and she got into the tent and was quiet in there for a while Wes and I kept on chatting. And as they got later and darker, probably around 11:30, 11:45 or so, Nikki sort of calls out to Wes and I and says, "Hey guys, I'm hearing something really weird over here." And because Wes and I were talking with each other, we hadn't really been able to, we hadn't heard anything up to that point, but we got quiet so that way we could try and listen to what she was talking about. She said, "It kind of sounds like something's growling." We went over to the tent, which was probably only 10, 15 feet away from the fire, maybe 20 feet. And we go over to where she is, and the tent is backed up to this aspen forest. And we come over, and we have our flashlights with us. And as we listen, you can hear this. At least I could. It was faint, but it was still there, and it was this sort of rattling breath, as something was breathing with a very sort of guttural background to it. Wes had a hard time hearing it, and Wesley is also one of my best friends, like I said, but he's also very skeptical of all of the anything that has to do with the supernatural. And as Nikki could hear this, I also felt like I could hear it. Wes felt like he might have been able to hear something, but wasn't really sure what he was hearing or if he was even hearing anything at all. But like I said, I could hear this growling, this breathing pretty clearly. And where it was coming from, I'd flash my flashlight on, and I wouldn't see anything. And it was just so odd, because I felt like I was flashing in the right direction, but any of the bushes that were in that area would not have been big enough to cover whatever was making this rattling breathing, this guttural sound, because it sounded like it was coming from something big, but the only thing that was over there was just some small bushes. So we eventually, it kind of faded away, and we went back to sitting around the fire, and Nicole calmed down, and she eventually nodded off. Throughout that night, I remember seeing, I had learned somewhat recently about the phenomenon of the floating lights, the floating orbs that are often associated with Bigfoot. And funny story here, I kept on seeing these when I would flash my light into the forest, and sometimes just because of the fire, I would see these little flashing little flashes of light that would kind of pop in and out. And we don't have fireflies out here in Utah, at least not in that part. And what I kept on looking over and saying, Wes, do you see what I'm seeing? And eventually we were able to find out that they were eyes of deer. So that was a little bit of a letdown for me, because I was thinking this might be the whole flashing or the orbs of light phenomenon, but it was just these the eyes of these deer. Still kind of cool to see the deer so close to our campsite. And once again, this wasn't really a campsite. It was just this area in the trees that was a bit more cleared, where we had made our fire and put up our tents. So we end up going to bed, and we have a good night's sleep. And the next morning, I wake up to hearing what I thought was the sound of a baby bear. And if you're not familiar with what baby bears sound like, you can jump online and listen for yourself. But it's this, it almost sounds like a little cow or something. It almost sounds like I don't know how to describe it, but that's what I thought I was hearing. And when I don't know if it was because I was overcome with something, or if it was just because I like animals and wanted to see some wildlife, but I felt the urge to go see this baby bear, not even thinking in my head that if there was a baby, there probably was a mama around. But I threw on my shoes and jumped out of the tent. And as I was doing this, I felt like I could hear this baby bear, or whatever was making this sound, run to my right, deeper into the forest. So I jump out of the tent and I start running after this sound, because I wanted to see whatever it was. And I don't know what came over me, but I really wanted to see this. So as I kept on running, I could hear the sound getting fainter and fainter further off into the forest. And eventually I stopped running and realized that I had come out into sort of a clearing where there weren't as many trees, at least ones that were upright and normal, but there were some tree formations. There were class 1 and 2. There was this one that was these huge, long trunks of these trees that had been stripped of much of their foliage, and they had been crisscrossed in a way. Some of them were so big that I could walk along them, and I could tell that some of the roots were pointing up into the sky, and the top of the tree was shoved down into the earth. And I just thought to myself, what a weird thing if this is something that people made, because once again, this is not too far from the highway at all. And then I saw up the hill even more, one of the class 2 types of tree formations, which looks like a teepee, a bunch of smaller sticks all surrounding the trunk of another tree. And there was a ton of these little sticks. Whoever made that, if it was a person, had to have taken a lot of time to find that many sticks that all and remove all of the little branches that come off of sticks in order to make this little tree formation. I went and woke up my wife and my buddy, and we checked out the area and kind of explored and realized that it was something interesting that none of us had really seen up close and personal before. Now, once again, is this evidence of Bigfoot? One could easily argue, no, that has nothing to do with it. But in my mind, I don't know if it's coincidence that we heard the guttural breathing and not seeing the source of it, hearing something that lured me into the woods, and then coming across these tree formations. It could be argued that it was simply a series of events that can only be related to Bigfoot if you really try and make it related to Bigfoot. But in my opinion, I feel like a lot of those things match up with much of the folklore around these creatures. So, all right, now on to my third story. Fast forward a year and a half to 2 years. The year is 2022. My wife Nikki and I moved to Silverton, Oregon. And for those who aren't familiar with where Silverton is, it's probably the closest city to Silver Falls State Park, which is one of the prettiest parks that you can go adventuring in there in Oregon. Filled with gorgeous waterfalls, beautiful forests, and this once again is in the summertime, the very early summer in June. It possibly was late spring, possibly May, but I believe it was June. And I had previously at church given a talk, or where I had spoken to our congregation that we call a ward in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in my talk, when I had introduced myself, I kind of explained that, a little bit about what I like to do, said that I, liked to go longboard skating, as well as, surfing, and as one of my, favorite things to do was get lost in the woods, hiking, looking for Bigfoot. And that got a chuckle, of course, out of the congregation, and I was just trying to endear myself to them. And as I finished that talk and came down from the pulpit and was amongst the congregation, I remember there was this old timer who came up to me, old cowboy kind of guy, and said, "Hey, you mean what you said about going and looking for Bigfoot in the woods?" And I'm trying to gauge whether this guy is going to be, trying to make a joke at my expense for everyone to laugh at, or if he was being genuine. So I said, "Well, yeah, you never know. I love being outside, and I think the whole idea of it's pretty fun." So I thought that was a pretty safe answer, and I was rewarded because he said, "Well, if you ever want to go squatching, I got a few hot spots that I know about." And I was blown away. I was excited because this was not only someone who not only understood the reality of these creatures, but who knew the area, and might even guarantee me the opportunity of having some of my own experiences. So I took him up on it, and he said, "Well, how about we have lunch, grab some burgers at the Wooden Nickel." And the Wooden Nickel was this old cool saloon, kind of bar there in town, and we get in there, and it's all Western themed. You got like a buffalo on the a buffalo head on the side of the on the wall. You've got a jukebox playing some Waylon Jennings. You've got a bunch of everything seems to be made of wood, and a lot of really yummy food that you can smell, and kind of smoky in there. And we sit down into this, we sit down in the, not on the bar, but in the benches, and I feel like I'm on the set of a movie, because when we sit down, this man, his name is Steve, he pulls out a hand-drawn map of the area of Silverton and the surrounding countryside and forests, and shows me all of these different spots where he said that there was a lot of Bigfoot activity. So I asked him how long he'd been involved in this, and he said that he and his buddies had been looking for these things and enjoying going out and squatching, as he endearingly called it, since the 70s, and that now he was one of the only ones who still lived in the area, and kind of I felt like he kind of wanted to pass the torch on, and I was really excited. So he showed me this, and then he asked if I wanted to hear some audio that he'd recorded, and he showed me on his little recording device, let me hear these Bigfoot howls, more like screams, because they were high-pitched and bone-chilling. I had never heard something like that before from someone who I actually knew. It always was stuff that I would hear and see online. And this man was someone who I felt like I could trust, just because, one, being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints means something to most members, and being honest is something that we all value a lot. And so him not only being a member of our church, but also just being an old timer. He's probably in his 70s and possibly even 80s. The fact that, he had really nothing to gain from this other than sharing his passion and knowledge about this subject. So he let me know all kinds of information about, how many there were according to what he was able to track and find out in the area. In each area, he revealed that they tend to have a certain amount of members in each tribe, around 4 or 5, and that there were about 3 or 4 different tribes in that area, and that they all kind of had their own territory. And he let me know that if I wanted to hear, wanted a bigger chance of seeing them, then the summertime is a good time, but if I want to be able to hear them more often, then it would be late fall, which I thought was very fascinating. And as he showed me this area, he asked if I would actually want to come out with him sometime, and I readily said yes. So I want to say about 2 weeks later, when we both finally had some time, we jumped in his truck and drove about only 40 minutes from Silverton, which surprised me because, it just always surprises me how in the PNW you can go a short amount of time. It might have only been even half an hour or 25 minutes, and we were already in a sea of green out in logging country. And as I was looking out over the vast expanse of pine trees, I thought to myself, man, anyone who doubts that a species of creatures as big as Bigfoot could exist in here without being seen is kidding themselves, because you could hide a dinosaur out here and no one would ever even know. There was just so much land and so much untouched, beautiful wilderness. Of course, you could still see that there were logging roads, and that's we went up one of these, and we were out in the middle of nowhere. I want to say we were in the Silver Falls, on the backside of the Silver Falls State Park, and while we're out there, he gets out of the truck and shows me this trail that only like a gator or a Kubota could go down, and a normal truck wouldn't be able to drive through that part of it. And it goes uphill. And as we're walking along, I notice about 9 feet up, there's smaller along this trail. There's all the pine trees around us look like they're younger and still growing, but probably a little bit smaller than the width of your average hydro flask. And I could see about 9 feet up that they are all snapped at the same place, more or less, and they're all pointing down towards the trail, the tops of these trees that have been snapped, and they're still hanging by the splinters. And it reminded me of when we snap a toothpick with our thumb, and it's still kind of hanging there as it points down. And that's what they looked like. And I asked Steve, I said, Steve, are these signs of Bigfoot? And he said, yeah, that's exactly what they are. They're markers of territory. So that fascinated me. And as we kept on walking along this trail, I peeked into the left side of the forest, and walked about a foot or two in and into the bush to be able to see what was actually in there, and just for fun. And as I looked in there, I don't know if the audience, if you've seen the movie Tarzan, the Disney movie Tarzan, or if you're familiar with gorillas from National Geographic, or have spent time with them in real life, you'll know that they have a sort of they create a bedding in the bush, and that is what I saw. I saw like 3 or 4 just totally flattened parts of the forest floor, where the leaves looked like they had been sat on and laid on so much that they almost looked gray compared to the rest of the foliage around it. And I asked Steve, I was like, Steve, do you think this could possibly be someplace where they sleep? And he said, yeah, I definitely think that's where they could sleep. Sometimes, or he's like, sometimes I'll come across these. These ones look like they haven't been slept in for a long while, though. And I could understand why he said that, because there was some dead parts of it that looked like it wasn't like a recent place that they had bedded down in. So as we're walking along this trail even more, there's a tree, a limb that has been placed directly in the path, just right there. And I thought that was kind of odd, and I asked Steve why he thought that was there, and he said, once again, it has to do something with their territory marking. And I asked him about the snapped trees again, and I said, it's weird. Normally, I might think that is something that loggers might do, but now I think about it, why in the world would they break their own trees, when, especially young ones, because that's future money. You're not going to just break a sapling like that and leave it there. That just doesn't make any sense. So anyways, we keep on walking, and all of a sudden, Steve lets out this bellow. He just yells at the top of his lungs, and I could tell he trying to imitate what a Sasquatch might sound like. And he told me that often they will respond. We didn't get any responses that time, but I could tell this man, either he was completely delusional or really had experiences with this, and I chose to believe the second. And honestly, it seemed more likely to me, because Steve was a very level-headed and just a pretty normal person. He didn't come across to me as someone who was just making up weird stuff to get attention. I really liked the guy. So we walked back down to the truck, and he decided, let's just, sit in the truck and see what happens. So we sit in there for a little while, and I say, you know what, I'm going to go up the trail by myself. So I start walking up the trail, and all of a sudden, to my right in the bushes, I start hearing something next to me. Now, I'm trying once again not to let the power of suggestion enter the experience. So I say, that could be anything. Could be a raccoon, a deer, but whatever this is, when I move forward, it would move forward, and it would follow me along the trail. And that kind of spooked me out a little bit, so I toss a rock into that area to see if it would kind of run off, and it did. It ran deeper into the forest, and I sort of trotted back down to the truck quicker than I might normally have done, because I realized once again I don't have any defense. And even though I'm close enough to the truck, I still am completely by myself. So I jump in the truck. I don't mention it to Steve, because I don't want him to get all excited over something that might not even be have anything to do with the subject. As we're sitting there for another 20 minutes or so, out of nowhere, from our right, as I'm looking to the right, I barely turn away and look forward in the truck through the windshield. There's a big, not a big, but a decent sized little pebble, more than a pebble. It was an actual rock. A rock gets thrown from our right at the windshield, and it slashes across the windshield and leaves a little dent. Now, that was a very strange experience because both me and Steve knew we were the only ones out there. And in order to have a rock thrown at the vehicle, something had to have launched it. And so we looked at each other and I said, now, what do you think that could have been one of these creatures? And he told me, well, let's think about it. What are some other options that you can think of? And I said, well, I guess it could be a bird that dropped the rock. And he said, well, he's like, that's maybe possible, but usually I don't see birds carrying rocks all that often, and it came from our right. I said, all right, so it definitely did come from our right. You could see the scratch mark along the windshield coming from the right to the left, and then that dent at the end. I said, maybe it was a deer that kicked it. And he said, were you not paying attention to what was over there? Have you been, spacing out? And I said, no, I've been looking over to the right into the forest for, I just barely turned away when that rock was over here. And he's like, well, don't you think you would have seen the deer if that was the case? Also, not that it's impossible, but a deer being able to kick with that kind of possible accuracy is a low likelihood. And I said, yeah, I feel like I would have seen the deer. And then I said, I guess it could have been a person. And he said, now, why would a person, first of all, why would a person do that? And first of all, did you see anyone? I don't see any other cars around here unless it was some ranger who's walking through the forest without any transportation and then all of a sudden decides to scare random citizens sitting in a truck by throwing a rock at the windshield. Just seems like a very strange prank to pull, especially if you're someone who's working for the state forest. And that was when I realized that the most likely scenario was that it was a Bigfoot that had thrown this rock at our truck. And it was hard to believe, but then I thought to myself, well, you know what? I'm in a spot where this man who I trust has told me there has been continuous activity, and I can't think of any other answer for this. And then that was when I finally told Steve about my experience as I walked up the hill, and he told me that he believed it was most likely a juvenile that had interacted with me and had snuck off and then come back down through the forest and thrown that rock at us to try and have some kind of an interaction with us. We didn't have any more activity after that, and it started getting dark, so we decided to drive back to Silverton. And while that was fun and interesting and eye-opening, it was nothing compared to my last and latest experience, which was easily, for me, the most convincing of all of these experiences that I'd had. So now and I apologize, that must have been that was still the year of 2022. So this was, fast forward to, actually it's possible that was 2021. But anyways, this is now for sure September of the year 2022. And at this point, my wife and I had just barely moved from Silverton, Oregon to Salem, Utah. And that's where we currently live. And after we had been living in Utah for only a few weeks, we had to turn right around and drive back to Oregon for my younger brother Dalton's bachelor party, or his wedding, and I was his best man, so I was going to be throwing his bachelor party. Now, none of his bachelors his fellow bachelors were actually able to make it to the wedding until the day of. And so, and our family, our culture being Christian, where a bachelor party is not really that crazy of an event, but we still try to make it as fun as possible. And I wanted that to still be something fun. So who enjoy being outside and spending time in nature, I told Dalton, was like, well, you know what, your bachelors can't make it, so let's just have a campsite or a camp out, me and you. We went to the coast that day. We went to Pacific City and hung out there with my sister and wife and nephew. And after that, Dalton is my younger brother, 6 years younger than me, and him and I are super close. We hung out at the beach for a while and decided I had already picked out a campsite that I wanted to go to that was a little bit north of Pacific City, somewhere between Pacific City and Tillamook. For whatever reason, the GPS stopped working on the way there. And I decided, you know what, we're not going to let this deter us. We're just going to find somewhere random to camp. So I found this old logging road that they're in the coastal range of Oregon, and we go up this logging road that says no trespassing, well, actually it didn't say no trespassing. It just said no fire, no camping. And it's not like we do this all that often, but Dalton and I said, you know what, it's only going to be one night. What can it hurt? So we drove my little Volkswagen Jetta up the mountain on this gravel road that led up to this ridge that had a big cell tower up at the top. And while we got up there, we saw that there was plenty of roads of logging roads as well as trails, and we didn't want a ranger to come by and tell us that we weren't allowed to be there, so we wanted to hide the car. And we found this old trail that led off into a deep, dark part of the woods. And we take the Volkswagen and drive it down this trail and realize at the bottom of the trail, about probably 100, 150 yards down into the forest, at the end where we parked the car, there was this more open area where we thought would be a good place to put our tent. And then to our right, there's more forest where amidst those trees you could have a good, it was very damp under those trees, so we knew that no fire was going to be able to start. And we made our own little, collected a bunch of rocks, made our own little fire pit, cleared that area. As we were doing that, I noticed some more tree formations, the little teepee kinds around that area. And I pointed out to Dalton and I say, hey, Salty, that's his nickname. I said, Salty, check these out. It looks like we got some Sasquatch tree formations. And he just kind of looks at me. He's familiar with the subject because I've introduced it to him, and he likes the idea of it. But he also is not as obsessed with it as I am. So he, of course, looks at it and he's like, hey, you never know, And then as we were continuing to make our little fire pit, he points out, hey, Riles, check this out. There's some footprints over here. And sure enough, I come over and I see that there's some footprints that lead to that place where our fire was, back into the forest. And they were older footprints. You couldn't really see if it was like a bare footprint or not, but they were bigger than my brother's shoe, who's probably a 10 and a half foot shoe. Or 10 and a half size foot, whatever. So we both kind of look at each other, raise our eyebrows, smile, and say, hey, this could be kind of interesting. We'll see what kind of happens. Neither of us are super convinced. At least he's not super convinced, I don't think, that this was for sure going to be Sasquatch territory. I was a little bit more, on my guard. And as the night wears on, it starts to get kind of quiet, a little bit eerie. But we throw on some music and we chat and roast our hot dogs and hang out and just enjoy each other's company around the fire. eventually it does get dark, and I start, hearing some things in the bushes every once in a while, and I flash my light into that direction, and Dalton always says, you're paranoid, man. You think everything's a Bigfoot and or something else. And I say, hey, better safe than sorry, and we continue to hang out, and it gets to the point where I want to say it was probably around midnight, and for those who aren't familiar, the forests in the PNW get dark. Like, you can get some very, very dark parts of the woods, and we were in one of those spots where it was just so dark, and you could see up through the canopy of trees that the stars were out, and often it's overcast, so you don't get to see the stars as often as some other places do. And so we decided, you know what, how about we put the fire out, go check out the stars, and then come back to our tent and call it a night. So we walked the 150 yards up the forest on that trail to get up to that ridge where the cell tower was to go see the stars. And at this point, like, it's dark enough where you can't really see your hand in front of your face when you're actually in the forest if your flashlight's off. So, like I said, we walk up to that cell tower, and we're standing there, and I'm, chatting to Dalton about something. Once again, still feeling a little bit creeped out, but I'm not trying to read too much into it or say something because I don't want to ruin this for Dalton. It's supposed to be a fun time for him and I to bond before, his wedding day. And as I'm talking and we're looking at the stars, all of a sudden, I realized throughout this that Dalton keeps on looking over his shoulder. Both sides, he's kind of looking around, looking a little bit suspicious about something, and I kind of choose to ignore it because I don't want to creep myself out more. And all of a sudden, he just sort of stops me mid-sentence and says, "Hey, let's go to bed." And I was like, "Okay, man, that's fine." So we start walking back to the trail, and we get probably a few paces into the actual forest down the trail, when all of a sudden, our flashlights are out. All of a sudden, Dalton's flashlight, boom, goes out, just completely, and he's like, "What the heck? Why I want to turn on?" And I take like 2 more steps, and boom, my flashlight goes out. So now it is pitch black. Dalton and I are very weirded out because I had checked that those flashlights were good to go before I left. They didn't seem like they were going to die. I think I can't remember if I actually put fresh batteries in them or not, but they were good flashlights. And as it got dark and it felt a little bit creepy because of that, Dalton takes out his phone and he's like, "Oh man, my phone's dead." And I from what I remember, Dalton's phone was not that close to dying when he last had looked at it. So it looked like it was gone. And my phone definitely wasn't. It was somewhere around 40 or 50%. And when I pulled mine out, it was at like 3%. And I was able to get the flashlight on just in time for us to be able to walk the rest of the way to the tent, get out our sleeping bags, and get ready to hit the hay. So as we're laying there, Dalton says to me, "Dude, is it like really quiet to you?" I was like, "Yeah, it's been eerily quiet." And Dalton says, "I don't know if I'm gonna be able to sleep like this." And I said, "Yeah, might be kind of rough." All of a sudden, we hear one little bug that goes like this weird kind of noise. And for Oregon in September, it is really strange to not hear frogs and crickets and owls and just the normal sounds of the night. So for it to be this silent and eerie was just very strange, and it produced in us almost this sense of doom or dread, this just kind of gross feeling that both of us just didn't like, felt like we shouldn't be there or something. But I tried not to let it overcome me, and I told Dalton that I was going to try and go to sleep. And I remember Dalton, before that happened, he just said, silence is supposed to be, the absence of sound. This sounds like as if silence was a sound. And yeah, maybe that was me that said that. I can't remember, to be honest, but one of us had stated that, and I remember it feeling very true. And as I was falling asleep, I must have faded off somewhat because I remember waking up and realizing that Dalton was awake next to me, and I said, "Hey dude, have you been able to sleep?" And he said, "No, not at all." I was like, how long was I asleep for? And he's like, "Probably like half an hour, 40 minutes. And I was like, man, I wonder why I woke up. And he said, probably because that one bug stopped. And I realized that once again, it was just absolute silence. And I couldn't help but shake that strange feeling that I kept on having of just this dark, sort of gloomy sense. And Dalton says, I gotta go to the bathroom. So I say, you know what, I actually got to too, and I don't really want to go out of the tent on my own, so let's just go out together. So we unzip the tent, we get out there, and as we're both going to the bathroom, I remember feeling like there were multiple sets of eyes on me. And I hadn't ever really experienced, except for that one time that the first story that I told you, the feeling like I'm being looked at or being watched in the forest, but this felt like overwhelmingly as if we weren't alone. So we get done with our business, get back in the tent, and as I'm laying there in the silence for probably 5-10 minutes, I think to myself, the last thing that I want right now is to hear something outside of the tent, to have it confirmed that we aren't alone, because we should be. We honestly should be. We're not super far from the highway, but we're far enough that there shouldn't be anyone wandering around up here at night. And as I thought that, within a few seconds, about 15 feet away where my car was, I hear the thump of a footfall and a bush rustling. And I immediately in my heart just sunk, and I was like, oh gosh. And as this footfall fell, I remember Dalton saying, "What is that?" And then I remember hearing it, or hearing them walk towards the tent. Step, 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 step. I knew that it was walking on 2 feet. It was not a deer or a cow. This was someone or something that walks on 2 legs, and it was coming towards our tent. Whatever it was didn't sound absolutely massive, but it sounded big enough for me to be able to hear it as it walked towards us. And I said to Dalton, "That's something walking towards our tent, dude." And I remember Dalton saying, "No, it's not. No, there's no way, dude." And I was like, "Yes, it is, man. That's something walking towards the tent." And I was scared. But at the same time, I thought, okay, if this is a Bigfoot, I don't know how it's going to react. But once again, I don't have a weapon on me. My bear spray and other things I usually use to defend myself are back home in Utah. And all I have is a hatchet, which I now realize Dalton had a hold of. And as I just thought to myself, as this thing was walking towards us, because it would walk a few steps and then pause, and then walk a few more steps and then pause, and it was getting closer and closer. It got to the point where it was probably it felt like it had to be 5 feet away from the tent. And I told myself, I'm gonna regret if I don't try and see this thing, because if I'm dead, I'm dead, But if it is a Sasquatch or something similar, I want to be able to say that I've seen it. So I slowly grab my flashlight as this thing is walking closer to the tent. Like I said, when it was within about 5 feet, I unzipped the nylon part of the tent on the interior, so that way all that was between me and whatever was out there was the mesh lining. And I flash my flashlight right where it should be, and I don't see anything. Nothing at all. And I look there for like 2 or 3 seconds, and then all of a sudden, boom, my flashlight goes out again. And at this point, Dalton and I both start bumbling about the tent, knocking heads, trying to find our other flashlight. And we're just freaking out. And I'm panicking because whatever is out there is still out there, even though I couldn't see it, and it is pitch black. So finally, we get a hold of another flashlight. We flash it out there. We don't hear anything. We try and stay quiet, and eventually we try and lay back down. And as we're laying there, Dalton's like, "Hey man, if you want to go home, like I'm okay with going home." And I say, "Well, if only if you do. I mean, I'll go if you want to go." And we both were like, Okay, let's go. So we grab our stuff out of the sleeping bag. We stuff it into the back of our of my trunk. We don't bother, putting down the tent and folding it. We just collapse it and throw it all in the back. We jump in the car and we start driving up that those 100 to 150 yards up through the forest trail to get back onto that ridge. And as we're going up, I confirm with Dalton. I was like, dude, you heard what I heard, right? And he's like, what, the thing walking around the tent? I was like, yeah, that. He's like, oh yeah, I heard that. And we get up to that ridge and he says, dude, I gotta let you know, when we were up here looking at the stars, I kept on seeing figures in the shadows surrounding us. And I look at him and I say, what? And he said, yeah, like out of the corners of my eyes, everywhere I would turn, I'd see like a figure of sorts, and it would usually duck behind like a tree or a rock or something. And it was on to our left, our right, behind us, in front of us, all over. And I just said, oh my gosh, man, that is so creepy. Like, next time, mention that beforehand. And I was like, why didn't you say anything? And he's like, well, because I knew this meant a lot to you being the best man, and I know you wanted to have a good bachelor party, and I didn't want to ruin it by having us go home early. And I was like, next time, man, just mention that beforehand, and we'll get out of here. And as our windows are down because we wanted to make sure that we would hear anything that was around us as we drove out of there. And as we get down the ridge towards the highway, all of a sudden we start hearing crickets, frogs, owls hooting, all the normal sounds of the night. And both of us were like, that is what night is supposed to sound like. Why was that ridge so silent and creepy? And we get onto the actual highway and are kind of inching our way along because we're still kind of talking. And to my right, I see more of those tree breaks about 10 feet in the air, and they're all snapped down, pointing towards the road. And I point that out to Dalton, and he's like, dude, don't tell me that. Let's just get out of here. So we zoom down the highway, get back to my parents' place in West Salem, Oregon, and it's probably around 3 a.m. Neither of us had the greatest night's sleep, and we both of us were fairly creeped out. And I remember asking my brother the next day, what if he still felt the way he felt, the night before. And he's like, no, I feel better now. But man, he's like, that feeling that we had when we were up on that ridge, the only other time that I felt that was when I was living in, he spent 2 years in Ghana, Africa, serving a mission for our church. And he says that the only time that I ever felt like that was when I was in parts of Africa where they were messing around with voodoo. And that was impactful for me just because, that brought me back to some memories of when I was living in Peru. And there's also some experiences that I had that brought a similar sort of otherworldly feeling about the area. And I'll tell some of those stories later. But I remember at some point during that week thinking about that experience, and I decided to Google silence in the woods, Bigfoot, just to see what would come up, to see if there was a connection. Because honestly, I could not think of a better answer to what was up there. And on Quora or Reddit or somewhere like that, I found plenty of people that were talking about how they experienced the same thing, where they would hear this overwhelming silence in the forest right before they would see or experience something that was Bigfoot related. And some people had the idea that it could have to do with the fact that it's an apex predator, and therefore when it's around, the other smaller animals are simply going to be quiet. But there was another theory that I thought was even more compelling that actually could have explained some of the other strange phenomena that happened that night. And it was the idea that a Bigfoot, or the Bigfoot creatures, can use infrasound. And I had to learn what that was. Infrasound apparently is, so I already knew, and you might know as well, that dogs can hear high-pitched decibels of sound that our human ears can't hear. Well, apparently there's the low equivalent of that as well, that we can't hear as humans, but other animals can, and it's emitted by various big animals, like some tigers, I want to say possibly rhinos or hippos as well, and that the predators will use this as a tactic to find their prey or to paralyze their prey, because it has such an effect where it produces this, when humans will hear it, they get this kind of sense of dread or doom, and often it can induce vomiting in people because they feel sick of how this feels. And there's others on the same sort of thread that we're talking about, how infrasound can also produce sort of a muffling effect in the sound around the person that it's being emitted towards. And that could explain why it felt so quiet when we were up there. It could explain the weird sense of dark gloominess that we kind of felt, and creepiness, as well as there was another part of the thread that talked about how if infrasound can be used to such a high level that it can even possibly drain batteries, and cause electronics to stop working. And that can explain why our flashlights went out. And even though they had brand new batteries, that's the second time that I used the flashlight and it just went out. And the batteries in it were dead after that. So when I found that theory, I sent it to Dalton. I said, hey, dude, check this out. This might be exactly what was going on that night. And both him and I haven't ever come to any sort of conclusion for sure, but it's been something that neither of us will ever remember, or will never forget. We'll always remember. And we made sure that we redeemed the camping experience by having a normal, good camp out here in Utah with my siblings out in this cool area for my brother-in-law's birthday. And it was a normal, good, fun camp out. But I think that Dalton and I will never forget that night that we spent somewhere in the coastal range of Oregon in the logging trail forests between Pacific City and Tillamook. And I think for me, that was the experience that solidified the legitimacy of these stories that I have been hearing. Even though I still haven't seen with my own two eyes a Sasquatch, I feel like those creatures were the culprits. My father-in-law suggested it possibly was a group of sentinels that were meant to try and scare us out of there in order to get us out of their territory. And I thought that was a solid enough theory, and it has made me curious enough to continue trying to find out more and more about this creature, about the factors of the unknown and the supernatural elements of Bigfoot. 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 All right, folks, that's it for tonight. Next episode, I'll be introducing one of my future co-hosts who will occasionally be coming on to the show, my good buddy Cooper. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the BLC. Be sure to subscribe and share. And it would be really awesome if you'd be willing to take just a minute to give us a review, as that helps this show out a ton.